Drink Pepsi Black for max taste, no sugar. Pepsi Black time, 18 hours or 6 p.m.
The news from Guyana, the region and the world. Compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom and powered by DemeraraWaves.com.
What's the news at 6? I'm Dennis Chabrol. Good evening. The news comes to you with the compliments of KFC Kentucky Fried Chicken. First, the highlights. The Guyana Teachers Union is calling for schools to be closed as teachers and students are being infected by COVID. A house has crushed to death a woman and her daughter while they were feeding puppies. Regionally, the Bahamas is considering importing nurses as more COVID-infected healthcare workers are off the job. The details of these and other stories in a moment.
KFC delivery is now available from the Amazonia location. For shore-based Little Diamond residents, call 632-0533, 632-0533, 6080162, 6080162, or 503-3591, 503-3591. That's KFC's delivery service from the Amazonia location. KFC.
It's finger-licking good.
And now the news in detail. Shadow Minister of Education Dr. Nicolette Henry is cautious about schools remaining open in light of the surge in the number of coronavirus cases. She acknowledges that the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, says that schools should remain open to avoid learning loss. Among the recommendations are the need for consultations among all stakeholders in the education system, physical distancing during school sessions, the promotion of safety and hygiene practices to, from, and at school, as well as equal access for marginalized segments. But at the same time, Dr. Henry, who is a former Minister of Education, says she does not believe that the ministry has put in place all of the measures that UNICEF has recommended at all of the schools.
Provide us with the number of teachers.
Yes, UNICEF would have indicated that it would be in the best interest in order to reduce learning loss to have schools reopen, but they did not stop there. They also pointed out that in order for schools to be safe, there are certain measures that must be put in place, which, as far as I'm aware, they have not been put in place. And so I think that there is where we have to disconnect. There is where our concern, particularly at the level of the coalition lines, and I don't think that anybody who is technically competent would advise the Minister of Education to reopen school and not to put those measures in place.
Former Minister of Education, Dr. Nicolette Henry. The opposition of Partnership for National Unity's parliamentarian Ganesh Mahipal also called on the government to say how many students and parents have been infected by COVID so far.
Provide us with the number of teachers that are currently positive and state whether they are isolated at home or elsewhere. We are not asking for people's name, but we need the data. We need the numbers. We want to also know the total number of children that were tested positive, and we want to know what is the transmissibility.
APNU AFC parliamentarian Ganesh Mahipal. The Guyana Teachers Union, GTU, is calling on the Ministry of Education to order the closure of schools because teachers are being infected with COVID-19. The union says all schools should be closed immediately so that the Ministry of Health can conduct a proper assessment before advising on the way forward. But President Irfan Ali has made it clear that schools will not be closed.
In terms of schools, we have seen all the data so far, and most countries, almost all the countries, are saying we cannot close the schools. We cannot close the education system. They're keeping the schools open. They're doing the testing. They're taking the precautions. They're encouraging the wearing of masks.
The GTU says its figures show that 65 teachers and 44 students have tested positive in 2 days of school. The union also says that 15 schools were forced to close due to COVID-19 cases. However, according to the union, a number of other schools are operating despite reporting issues of COVID-19. The teachers' union says it prefers face-to-face learning rather than online learning, but the rate at which persons are getting sick due to COVID-19 infections has to be addressed now. Minister of Health Dr. Frank Anthony says that with more than 3,000 active COVID cases countrywide, those infected persons are being urged to isolate themselves at home.
All these people who have tested positive, we are asking them to stay in isolation. There are people who have tested positive and sometimes they still walk around the place, which means that they would be in their infectious period and they would be the persons who would be spreading it to others. So if you have been diagnosed as being positive, then you should stay home and be in isolation so as to prevent or reduce the spread of Omicron. If people don't behave responsibly, we are going to see more cases. So I'm asking all these persons, these 3,481 persons that currently have active COVID, that they remain in isolation and follow the protocol that has been established.
Health Minister Dr. Frank Anthony. The Ministry of Health says there are now 967 new COVID cases amid informal speculations that the highly contagious Omicron variant is in Guyana. The Ministry of Health says there are now also showing that 3,374 persons have been told to isolate themselves at home to prevent the virus from spreading further. Of the 75 persons who are hospitalized, the Health Ministry says that 6 of them are seriously sick and are receiving intensive care. The number of COVID deaths dating back to March 2021 is now 1,064. 5 others have been told to quarantine as they await results or are being observed to see if they will develop symptoms. The Ministry of Health says that based on trends and comparisons with other countries in the Caribbean and elsewhere, as well as scientific tests, the Omicron variant is in Guyana. The opposition People's National Congress Reform PNCR has a new General Secretary. She's Attorney-at-Law Geeta Chandin Edmond. The PNCR says that its leader, Aubrey Norton, appointed her from January 3. The party notes that she's a parliamentarian and that she enjoys the support of the PNCR's membership as she has been elected to its central executive. The PNCR highlights that Ms. Chandin Edmond is a lawyer by profession and possesses management skills and good human relations skills that make her suitable to be General Secretary of the PNCR. The party says it has confidence in her abilities and will work with her as she strengthens and reorganizes the administration of the PNCR. A woman and her 6-year-old daughter have died after the house collapsed yesterday afternoon. The incident occurred at about 4 p.m. at Lower Montesika Creek, Essequibo River. Dead are 35-year-old female farmer Simati Chandra and her 6-year-old daughter Christine Sukdeo. The Guyana Police Force says the mother and her daughter were under the house feeding puppies when the house collapsed. The incident occurred while the woman's husband, Tulsiram Sukdeo, was going to burn bushes on another plot of land 2 lots away. Georgetown Mayor Obrach Narayan says the City Council has approved the bylaws to fine people who litter the town. He says Local Government Minister Nigel Dharamlal has been asked to approve the bylaws that provide for fines. Mr. Dharamlal has refused to respond to questions about whether he'll approve the bylaws. Mayor Narayan says that the city needs its own bylaws because it is not profitable to enforce the National Environmental Protection Act.
We do not get anything from it, but the mayor's city council resources has to be spent to prepare the cases and so on and go to court. We have to do the patrol, we have to do the policing, and everything. And that's why in any city across the world, and let us take it to our neighboring countries, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, let us look at those countries. This city has a littering bylaws, and we need to enforce such a bylaw independently at the level of the city. So that is what we're calling on the Honorable Minister to approve this littering bylaw as early as possible.
He says if approved by the local government minister, persons can be fined $10,000 for the first offence, $20,000 for the second offence, and $35,000, but not more than $500,000 for the third offence. The bylaws also provide for businesses to be licensed once their garbage storage facilities meet the required standards. Turning to news now from the Caribbean, the Bahamas is considering importing nurses as the COVID pandemic continues to sicken healthcare workers. With daily COVID-19 cases in their hundreds and more than 130 healthcare workers out of the public health system, the Consultant Physicians Staff Association, CPSA, is concerned about the situation there. Our News Bahamas' Jasmine Brown reports.
CPSA President Dr. Sabri K. Pinder Butler says the massive wave of COVID cases is crushing the healthcare system as dozens of doctors have been impacted and hospital wards are being shut down.
We are at the point, despite our best efforts, that this is certainly critical.
Dr. Pinder Butler speaking to our news team as she took a quick break in the middle of a busy clinic shift to explain the dire circumstances. The CPSA president is one of hundreds of healthcare workers on the front lines of the fight against COVID. 130 of her fellow healthcare workers are out of the system.
When you have to close multiple wards and you're not able to reopen them, whether it's because of staffing challenges or whether it's because of other factors, certainly staffing challenges being the main one. If you have the space, but you still don't have the staff to monitor the patient, still don't have the staff to provide the treatment and care, then that is definitely a critical point.
Health Minister Dr. Michael Darville said the government is seeking to bring an additional 50 nurses from abroad to assist as it tries to get a handle on the COVID-19 pandemic.
We certainly know that we're going to need more help. I know that what I've heard from the Ministry of Health that they're planning to augment staff. We're trying to understand, how that will happen. Who will the staff be? Where will they go? Those sorts of things, and that's physician and nursing staff, because we have not been engaged in those discussions as it relates to how that will work. And I think it's very critical for persons on the ground who are working every day to be involved at that level so that you can help direct where we may be better to serve our population.
Both Darville and Prime Minister Philip Brave Davis have repeatedly said the government is trying to balance the economy with the COVID-19 situation in the Bahamas. Reporting for our news, I'm Jasmine Brown.
Grenada's health and port authorities cancelled 5 cruise ship calls between December and January due to outbreaks of flu-like symptoms aboard. Based on the Grenada cruise ship protocol, cruise lines are mandated to immediately report outbreaks of acute respiratory illnesses, flu-like illnesses among passengers or crew members. Also, Port Health Authority and local agents are required to report if there is any SARS COVID-19 positive cases. Using these guidelines, the health authorities have cancelled 5 cruise calls from December 29, 2021 to January 7, 2022 to protect Grenada's population. Marketing and sales manager of the Grenada Tourism Authority, Nikayan Roberts, says this precautionary process is applied to all cruise calls expected to Grenada until May 2022, when the 2021-2022 season ends. Grenada's 2021-2022 cruise ship season began in November, and a little more than 200 ships are scheduled to berth at the island's harbour. However, since the discovery of the Omicron variant of COVID-19, several ships have either cancelled schedules to the ports or were turned away because of the COVID-19 outbreak on board. Health Minister of Grenada Nicholas Steele disclosed on Tuesday during the post-cabinet briefing that there is a health protocol or an agreement with minimum requirements for cruise ships and all other sailing vessels to fulfill for them to be allowed to berth at any of the harbors in Grenada. He says permission will only be granted to a sailing vessel if less than 1% of the passengers on board are infected with COVID-19 or other infectious diseases. Suriname's Chief of Police Roberto Prad will step down later this month to make way for a reform of that law enforcement agency. Star News reports that Mr. Prad will leave the job on January 25. His announcement came after two meetings, one with the Minister of Justice and Police Kenneth Aboxy and another with President Chandrika Prasad Santokhi. The police chief says he is giving the government sufficient space to implement the planned reorganization of the Suriname Police Corps. Government says it will work on a management plan to lead the force. Shell Trinidad and Tobago's national gas company NGC have signed an agreement for the development of a natural gas project at the concession named Manatee. Details from TTT News Online.
In other news, the National Gas Company has signed a head of agreement with Shell to advance the Manatee Gas Field project. In a media release, NGC said the agreement starts the pre-front-end engineering design phase for the processing of the Manatee gas via NGC's Beachfield facility. NGC said the agreement sets the frame for technical and commercial work to enable further progress through this phase of the project. NGC President Mark Lokwan believes the signing bodes well for the local energy sector since it points to yet another milestone in meeting the country's future demands for natural gas. He added that this is an important step for the overall Manatee project and assured that the company remains committed to provide a steady and reliable supply of natural gas.
And now we go to the BBC World Service for the latest bulletin of international news.
I'm Stuart McIntosh with the BBC News. Hello. The head of the Russian-led force being sent to help crush anti-government protests in Kazakhstan says it will deploy 2,500 troops. Some have already arrived to support Kazakh security forces who are trying to quell protests across the country. Steve Jackson reports.
The head of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, made up of 6 former Soviet states led by Russia, said the force would stay in Kazakhstan for days or even weeks. Stanislav Zas told Russian media the duration of the deployment would depend on the situation on the ground and the wishes of the Kazakh leadership, who asked for help in the first place. The violence in the main city, Almaty, continued into the night, with reports suggesting the authorities have regained control of a key central square. Many protesters and some members of the security forces are said to have been killed since the unrest began, but accurate information is hard to come by.
BBC Russia's Olga Evshina says the nature of the demonstrations has changed.
During the first few days, the protest was purely economical and political, with some political demands. But yesterday it went violent and people saw clashes, people saw looting, and some people at the moment are afraid, and they say, listen, we were living our lives, we were struggling, but still it was more or less okay. Now we have to queue for bread, we have to queue for petrol, we can't get out cash. And this sort of plays to the hand of the authorities. And of course, the majority of people are scared because of the amount of gunfire and stun grenades which people hear out in the streets.
President Biden has accused Donald Trump of holding a dagger to the throat of American democracy in his most heated attack yet on his predecessor. In a speech marking the anniversary of the storming of Congress by Mr. Trump's supporters, President Biden accused him of spinning a web of lies and trying to rewrite history. He blamed Mr. Trump's refusal to accept his election defeat for sparking an armed insurrection. Thousands of people in Sudan have protested once more against military rule. The army seized power in October, provoking a popular uprising as well as international condemnation. Demonstrators in the capital Khartoum were met by members of the security forces, as Richard Hamilton explains.
As they marched towards the presidential palace, the security forces fired volleys of tear gas canisters, forming thick and choking clouds. This is the latest in a series of protests and the first organised march since the resignation of the Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok on Sunday. The protesters are showing no sign of giving up, but neither is the military.
Doctors aligned with the protest movement say 3 people were shot dead in demonstrations in the capital's twin city Omdurman, as well as in North Khartoum. There were also marches in other places. This is the World News from the BBC. Britain's Ministry of Defence says late in 2020 a Royal Navy ship, HMS Northumberland, came into contact with a Russian submarine. It said the point of contact was the ship's towed array sonar, a long cable carrying microphones designed to detect quiet enemy subs. Correspondents say there's no suggestion that the action was deliberate. The Indian government has said it's taking steps to ensure the country's security interests are protected, in response to reports that China is building a bridge in the northern Ladakh region. Recent satellite imagery shows what appears to be a construction on the Pangdong So Lake, close to the demarcation line between the two countries. 3 suspected pirates detained for 6 weeks on board a Danish naval frigate off West Africa have been released at sea after Denmark's Justice Minister waived charges of attempted manslaughter against them. The men were detained in November after an exchange of fire with the Danish military in the Gulf of Guinea off Nigeria. Danny Eberhard has this report.
Denmark has been taking part in international efforts to combat piracy in the Gulf of Guinea, but this incident had left it with a legal headache. Efforts to extradite the suspects to countries in the region had failed. They could have been brought to Denmark for criminal prosecution, but the Justice Ministry said there was a risk that they could not subsequently be deported, irrespective of any possible conviction. This fact, it said, might prove an incentive for others to commit criminal acts in an attempt to get prosecuted in Denmark.
The father of the Serbian tennis star Novak Djokovic says his son is receiving what he called humiliating treatment in Australia, where he's fighting deportation. Srđan Djokovic said the player had had his wallet confiscated and was unable to change his clothes. Border officials say Djokovic didn't provide adequate proof that he was medically exempt. BBC News.
That's the news to the moment.
After a hard day's work, a lime at the workplace would be great, and even greater and better with KFC, with a wide choice of finger-licking meals in a wide range of sizes. Could be a birthday celebration or promotion, or a lime for no reason at all. Any lime, anytime, anywhere is better and tastier with a delicious meal from any of KFC's 9 locations, including the Amazonia Mall at Providence, open now from 9 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. KFC.
It's finger-licking good.
Now to end the news, a recap of the highlights. The Guyana Teachers Union is calling for schools to be closed as teachers and students are being infected by COVID-19. A house has crushed to death a woman and her daughter while they were feeding puppies. Regionally, the Bahamas is considering importing nurses as more COVID-infected healthcare workers are off the job. The news came to you with the compliments of Kentucky Fried Chicken, KFC.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio Newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.